olds. And after I picked my jaw up off the floor, I said, yes, please.
What is
A
this?
curved dash olds. It's 1901. This was basically Ransom Old's first mass produced car that was made in Lansing. He made his first car in 1897, but there were only a handful of those made. And this was really once he started to go into production. And it's unfortunately it's not drivable. We were going to try to tool down Michigan Avenue from their museum to City Hall, but it will be arriving at City Hall at noon tomorrow. So if anyone would like to help push a 100-and-some-year-old car into City Hall,
I was thinking about that plaza there. Is that going to be easy to get it up those steps, or is there
You can
some
go
sort of-
around it. There's a way to go around
Yes.
it. But it only weighs 650 pounds.
Oh, wow.
They were not heavy cars, and they weren't big. It's the only car that will fit through those doors.
Ah. Well, tell us a little more. This is the Historical Society of Greater Lansing's Made in Lansing
Yes.
extravaganza. And it kicks off when?
It kicks off Friday night from 5 to 7, and then it will be open from 10 to 5 for Be a Tourist in Your Own Town. And then it will be open regular City Hall business hours through the end of October.
Wow.
The exhibit looks at about 125 years of innovation in Lansing. We're looking at products that people associate with the city and products that people don't. It's been really fascinating learning what all we've produced here over the years. Some things had a long run of production. Beeman Stoves, for example, was the biggest employer in Lansing in the late 19th century, and they produced stoves for several decades. Whereas other companies, there was a company that made cut glass in Lansing. They only produced for about 6 years, and then they closed up and just simply became a retailer of glass that was brought in from elsewhere. But we have a fantastic list of objects that we're including. We've kind of broken it down by category. So we're looking at some of the agricultural implements and the wooden things that were being fabricated here that helped lead to the auto industry. For example, Pruden Wheels was a huge business in Lansing for a long time. That was one of the reasons that they chose to locate auto factories here, was because they already had the biggest supplier of wheels in the country. And those wheels would they would be used on artillery during World War I. We actually have 2 wheels that are on loan from us, from a local gentleman right now who, they're wooden wheels, they're banded in metal. They're believed to be actually from a World War I era artillery piece. And the exhibit goes through the changes in technology. For example, the fact that we are creating, food testing kits today, Neogen, the fact that there's internet software that's being produced. TechSmith is a significant local company these days. We're looking at categories like food and beverages, cigars, which used to be made in large numbers in Lansing, clothing, apparel, accessories, things that we use in our home, everything from trusses to paint to quilts. And we're looking both at factory-produced objects as well as hand-produced objects, and how, despite the fact that the Industrial Revolution brought mass production to this country and really changed Lansing as it changed our country, we as individuals still feel the need to create, whether it's creating art on our cars, whether it's hand carving, whether it's knitting.
Art is a stretch.
We as individuals feel the need to make stuff all the time. We do it during the day, and then we go home and do more of it at night as our hobby.
So do you have individuals who have contributed something, or are they like famous people who've done an artwork?
We have ordinary people and we have extraordinary people. We have, for example, a baby cradle that was hand carved by a gentleman I know. He is a retired state employee who actually goes to my church. He made this in anticipation of the birth of his first granddaughter back in 2001. And it follows a centuries-old tradition where men carve cradles that are then used for their children or their grandchildren. So it's a more modern piece made by an ordinary person, but it's carrying on a tradition that's been around for centuries, if not millennia.
How much room does the exhibit take up? Where will people find it? It sounds like with the car and everything, you're going to be taking over quite a bit of space this time.
We're in the atrium of City Hall, and it's pretty full.
Oh, good.
You
can't miss it.
No, you cannot. And we're having to design with mobility in mind. So if they're having a big event, they can possibly move things.
I see.
But the car is our largest object. Probably the next that will rival it is we have a large truss coming in from Hart Truss that I believe Bill is picking up and finagling tomorrow. One of my favorite pieces that's coming in is a handmade casket, actually.
Yes, I heard.
Furniture stores in the early days of Lansing in the 1850s and 1860s sold not only handmade furniture, but also handmade caskets. This was why you have companies like Jarvis Esty Furniture that evolve into companies like Estes Ledley Funeral Homes.
I see.
Because in the 20th century, as customs surrounding death and as our homes change, and the idea of where we should be mourning, if a funeral should take place in the parlor, in a church, or in a funeral home.
Big transition.
Right. You have coffins that are now being mass produced and shipped in. But at one point in time, from the moment you were born and placed in that baby cradle until the moment you died and were placed in that coffin, you were surrounded by things made locally. And this casket that is coming in, it's not a 100-year-old casket. Nobody has one of those lying around empty to spare.
Mostly underground.
And I'm glad you didn't go for one. Yes.
This casket we have is on loan to us from an Amish woodcarver that lives in Vermontville. And he still creates these caskets using his own tools
Oh, does he?
on site at his farm, and he sells them to local funeral homes. And it's interesting because
Does he ever sell to individuals, I wonder?
he said he has in a few cases. He works mostly through funeral homes, but the casket we're going to have is the simplest he makes, and it's that traditional coffin shape that you think of.
Yeah.
And it's
Which
really
they aren't anymore.
No, they aren't. And it's really interesting because as green burial becomes
I
more and
wondered
more
if
of
that's
a
what I was
thing
wondering
again,
about.
these natural, locally made caskets are being seen as a more responsible choice. And so again, the pendulum swings back to what we were doing 150 years ago.
I live next door to Leak Cemetery, and I told my husband to just get 2 giant hefty bags and roll me over.
I think that's against the law.
Oh, well, that seems like a good idea.
Val, what were some things that you were surprised that were made in Lansing that couldn't be found easily?
Well, we're still looking for a pair of mittens. At one point in time, we had woolen mills in Lansing, actually. But a lot of these goods are things that you use up. You wear the mittens until you outgrow them, or you lose one, or they get a hole in it. So they're not things that you save and put on the shelf necessarily, like a beautiful piece of
Was there a
cut glass.
factory here that made them? They don't have
Yes.
any leftover inventory?
No.
Nobody?
No, I mean,
This
this was
is-
close to 100 years ago.
Moths got them years ago.
And it was, I think they employed 250 people
Wow.
making mittens
Huh.
and scarves.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with Valerie Marvin of the Historical Society of Greater Lansing about the show opening up on Friday night on Made in Lansing and how hard it was to get her hands on mittens. I heard there were other things that were more difficult to get.
The piece Bill keeps trying to find is the chemical toilet that was produced about World War
Forgot about that
I
one.
era.
The danger is someone would use it, Bill.
The Dale, it was made by a Dale company, which later then made auto bodies and truck bodies, but it's called the Wolverine Chemical Toilet. And it was made
It was a
during-
U of M product.
Yeah, it's you.
Ha ha.
It was made in World War One for the front, which was kind of bizarre, and I think most of them got left in Europe. But they also made these for the home,
Well,
where it was kind of a transition between indoor and outdoor plumbing.
when I was a child, I was born in 44, and in 54, my parents moved out to a lake outside of Cleveland because my father was sure that the bomb was coming and they were going to drop one on Cleveland. So we got just far enough away. And for the first year in that house, we did have just a chemical toilet, which I thought was fairly disgusting.
It may have been a Wolverine.
Probably was.
It could have been.
Should have hung on to it for you, Bill.
Yeah.
What else are you looking for that somebody might have?
Wheelbarrow?
Well, the Lansing company made wheelbarrows for a long time, and they were at one point in time a huge producer nationally. In fact, if you go to the Comerica Bank building, which has carvings on the front of it that represent different things significant to the city, like the Capitol Dome, there's the Light of Knowledge representing MSU. One of the 6 objects on that building is a wheelbarrow, because more wheelbarrows were being made in Lansing than any other place at that time. This would have been the 1920s and 30s. The problem again is you use a wheelbarrow until it falls apart.
Right.
They disintegrate in your garage. You plant flowers in them and set them outside. They're exposed to the elements. There's something you use up and then it's gone.
Wow. You said that was the same problem with the sled? You're looking
The
for
bobsleigh or bobsled. Lansing was the largest producer of those two that item in the world, and they were
I
using.
was talking about the really kind of nice sleigh
No,
kind of thing.
No, pretty perfunctory.
Not
just
American
a run.
Flyer.
No, just wooden runners
Okay.
and a seat.
And a seat.
Mostly,
Oh.
and you can see how they came from some of the agricultural
Yeah.
items, like the plow. They just flipped it over. So those are gone, and they outdoors,
Huh.
used up.
Hmm.
And the price for one that collector told us about was $20,000. You'd seen one.
It may
Now,
not
this is
be in the collection soon.
Yeah, this was probably $1 or a 50-cent item back then.
Wow. Wow.
So there's things like that. One of the most unique things, and we actually have found some, is the pocket protector valve. Tell us about the
Oh,
pocket
yes.
protector.
There was a man named Hurley Smith who was from Michigan originally and moved to Buffalo, New York. And while he was there, he was working for a company that ended up in some legal trouble. And as he testified under oath, actually exposing the company somewhat, he lost his job. So he decided to start puttering around with something to appease his wife. His wife was always complaining that when he would come home wearing his white shirts, he was an engineer, his white shirts would have ink stains on them because he would keep pens in his pocket. And so he created what we today call the pocket protector. They were pocket shields at one point in time was what they were called. And he decided the very best place to produce these was Lansing, Michigan. So he picked up his family from Buffalo, moved to Lansing, and set up a small shop where he produced these for about 10 years. And it's funny because, you know, when we think of Lansing, I think we tend to often think of very, you know, like gritty industry, we think of the auto industry and such. But
Large
here,
scale.
exactly, here is the very symbol of nerddom, if you will, that is coming out of a small shop in Lansing. And there are actually patents that he filed with the U.S. government. We're going to have one of those patents on display. And it's a relatively, you know, simple item, but at the same time, it became very much a part of work attire for an entire generation of men because with the pens because with the pens that you were using, you know, you did have to worry about ink issues. They did, and this was a way that you could protect your clothing.
No, it's the TechSmith item Camtasia, the item that I mean, when you were saying software, I'm assuming that's what they're doing.
Snag it in Camtasia.
Oh, Snag it. Oh, yeah.
And you can even see
have like 250 people now.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's big time.
They were hoping to go even larger at one point, but I don't know how many new products they have in the pipeline nowadays. It's a hard field to stay current with, very hard.
And it's interesting because the materials they gave us, you can even see just the evolution in computer technology. The first one is on a floppy disk, and then it goes to CDs, and so on.
Yeah.
You know, another interesting one, and you know this person is Glenn Brown Productions.
Yes, he has a wonderful recording studio.
Incredible. It's a hidden gem here that produces like Kid Rock and Eminem, and now he designs sound studios all over the country.
Yeah. What is he bringing to the table here?
What did he bring, Valerie?
We have some albums that he put together that he has loaned to us. We also have a beautiful recording mic that he loaned.
Yes. He let us borrow one of his recording mics.
Gorgeous. Yeah.
It's probably from the 50s, I think.
I thought maybe you mooched one of the lava lamps.
No, didn't quite fit in the case. That's something else that's really surprised me is the amount of music that has come from Lansing.
Right.
We produced a lot of sheet music in the early 20th century. We have some patriotic tunes from World War I era. We have a violin that was remade by a local gentleman. His name was Louis Fegis, and his main business was making shoes, but in the back of his shop, he made and repaired violins. And you can find them today at Elderly Instruments. They come up relatively often, and it's fascinating because if you start to look into it, Lansing actually supported multiple violin makers at one point in time. And part of it was the connection with the university, and they would service instruments for the symphony and such. But, you know, violins in Lansing, not something most of us associate with the city.
What are there things that MSU has produced that they are the first of? The only thing that I know was the bovine growth hormone, which they patented long ago. I'm not sure I'd want to put a bottle of milk out and let it curdle, but I mean, that's one of their bigger.
One of the things, well, the cancer treatment
Theirs
drug,
are harder to show.
They didn't produce it here. It was produced in Arizona.
It's hard to show.
And that's one thing is there's all kinds of different made. There are some companies that are located here, for example, a lot of insurance companies, or a company like Two Men and a Truck, where they're located here. What they're producing is a service, though, versus a product necessarily.
So it doesn't fall under made.
Oh, yeah, it did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We're also looking at entertainment.
By the way, I happen to be over at, oh God, I'm blanking on her name, the owner of Two Men and a Truck.
Sheets.
Yeah, Mary Ellen. I was at her house one morning when she was calling her son and saying, "Come on, get over here. You've got a load to take." It was when they were in college. That's how they were putting them through. And she was answering the phone for them. It was just on the telephone off the dining room
Mhm.
table adventure at that point, and it's now grown into this mega million-dollar company. It's quite amazing.
I often wondered how they came about with their logo, just the kind of little
Yeah.
hand-drawn two guys. Well, the business started when her sons were in high school, and they decided to advertise in a local weekly paper and said, Mom, we need a logo. So she sat down and just sketched something out and sent it in, and that'll work. And it's still the logo they use
She
today.
was always very much an entrepreneur. She worked for the state of Michigan as a systems analyst, and at one winter, I remember she was selling kerosene stoves on the side. I mean, she was always doing something unique. She was one of those people that would always take a flyer on something, and that one certainly paid off. I think the difference between her and many other women we see is that she really just followed through. She saw the
She had
potential
a
for it.
vision.
She did, and she
Yeah,
said,
some
"This is something people really need."
Yeah, and it was started here in Lansing. It's a true American
It
success
is.
story, isn't
It
it?
is really.
It's really
It's
because
been
I think she was a single mom, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So she's going to stay in the family, and it's nice to see that. I mean, I think we think of Michigan as, as Lansing in particular is just sort of capital and cars, and that's about it. But there's a lot more to that history.
Another one that was started in high school was acd.net.
Yes, yes, I remember.
They built a computer that's the two brothers, Stephen and Kevin Shane, built a computer out of a little shop they had on Michigan Avenue. And the computer, I know it well because it was in our house for a while. It was built in 1992.
92.
Well, and it was Voyager. Remember Voyager that was around here? They started as a bulletin board, and then didn't they merge with ACD? I mean, it was lots of these little companies at first sort
the
of all
internet
started out
providers.
very small and bought each other out and expanded and changed. And yeah, very interesting to watch the evolution of all that.
I think people will be surprised what's in this exhibit
Ah,
because they'll probably come in thinking it's a lot of car parts.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite pieces, and part of it's because I'm a quilter, we have a bed covering that is sort of quilt-ish that's made by Hmong immigrants who came into Lansing in the 70s and 80s.
yeah.
This is an example of the sort of piecework that immigrant women have traditionally done because they're largely staying in the home. They don't know the language often, but it's still a way for them to help support their families. And it's absolutely beautiful. Very different from what you would expect from a traditional, American quilt. It's a black background, beautiful reds and whites,
Oh,
very
wow.
geometric shape. It's lovely. And it shows too that every new group that comes into Lansing and settles here adds something of their own culture, and that becomes a part of the story of the city.
Like German beer.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Or patent medicine. That's another
Oh,
one.
yeah, you said there are a lot of those bottles from the patent medicines.
They seem to survive patent medicines. There's one it's what, the Bon Cure?
Bon Cure, good cure, literally, if you translate it. It has to be a prohibition item because it lists on the front of it, it tells you how many tablespoons to take so many times a day, and the only content it lists is 6% alcohol, 16% alcohol, which is similar to what you would find actually in a strong wine today. Right. And this was a workaround for getting alcohol during the Prohibition era. Right. Druggists and doctors could write prescriptions. Yeah. Sometimes they would just say, take X number of tablespoons of whiskey, but often you could self-medicate by going to a drugstore and purchasing these items, which were not restricted.
It is funny, though, you use the word druggist, and I haven't heard it in years, because they changed to pharmacists now that we don't want anybody taking drugs, apparently. We don't have the war on pharma yet, though some of us
Or the war on patent medicines.
Yeah, I noticed it probably at the bottom of the bottle where they don't tell you is all the morphine that's in there and all the opium.
Oh.
Yep. Yeah. That was really typical. I'm surprised they can make cars.
I know. And drinking in the morning was part of the American tradition ever since the colonial days. I mean, putting a shot of booze in your coffee in the morning was part of the tradition with a lot of the men who worked in the factory. Very different era. Very different era. Boy, that's going to be a fascinating show.
One of the things I think, as people walk through this exhibit, they'll see the history of the 19th and 20th century.
Did you organize it by era, or you organized it by category?
We organized it largely by category. Okay. There is a little bit of a timeline at the beginning. We look at some of the things being produced that helped create the auto industry, but we look at it largely by either where the objects were being used. So there's a whole section devoted to homes, companies like Rugged Lumber who were making kit homes, because you had, thanks to the auto industry, this influx of people in the early 20th century. So as you walk through the exhibit, not only do you see the Lansing dairy bottle that you remember being delivered to your front door at one point, but you also see, a picture of the house that you may live in. You may see a pocket watch like the one your grandfather carried, eyeglasses that your mother wore when they had their family picture taken. All of these things, it's designed to to remind people that we are surrounded every day by objects. And today, I think we have this mentality that it just all comes from somewhere. We're not really sure where. Might be China, might be India, might be somewhere else. But at one point in time, we were living our lives surrounded by things that were produced locally. And I think we forget today there are still things being made. So many people assume the US has strictly moved to consumption, but there are still things being produced.
Oh, yeah.
And there are still factories and production companies that are major employers. We are not out of that production yet.
We still have a significant manufacturing sector, although nothing rivals the income that the automobile industry brought. So
No.
I guess rather than the milk truck and the horse, you went for the car.
No, and that's part of the story. And that's the story that's being told over at the Rio Transportation Museum, is the history of this country is seen from how it helped create the middle class.
Mm-hmm.
What are we seeing in Lansing concerning the museums? Are they all going to remain open? What's happening with the future of some of them? What's the latest on that? Any word on? No, nobody wants. It's one of those. All right.
I think museums all over the country are having trouble.
They are. They are.
First, they're perceived as a place where you go look at old things,
right?
And also they're expensive.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are perceived as being static. If you've been once, that's it. That's all you need to do. And that's one reason we feel very strongly about these pop-up exhibits. They appear, then they go away. So it's a limited window of time, and then there's a new product being produced.
Yeah. It would be nice if we could organize and do some sensible planning here and have the kinds of facilities where we could have those kinds of rotating exhibits. And the day may come soon, I hope.
Might. There's more than 40 organizations in Lansing that have something to do with history.
Wow.
It's probably bigger than the art community.
Wow.
But it hasn't done a good job of branding.
Whenever you do these, and you have programs that pop up in different places and special events, the size of the audience is always amazing. I mean, it draws a wonderful crowd. Are you going to be doing any of your walks this summer?
Oh, yes. We have 8 walking tours this summer.
Wow.
We are premiering 3 new Saturday morning scripts.
You're going to have to buy Valerie new shoes every week.
I'm not doing all of them.
She's not doing all of them.
And then we're also going to be doing 2 Thursday night tours this summer in conjunction with the Downtown Lansing Inc. group.
Wow.
So our schedule is on our website. You can find them. The new scripts that we're going to be adding in for our Saturday tours, one of them is called Ladies of Lansing and looks at women that have had a major influence on downtown. One of them is a continuation of the architectural tour we did last summer. Last summer, we tended to go south on Capitol and Washington Avenues. This time, we're going to head north. So we're going to be talking about buildings like St. Mary's Cathedral, the AT&T building, the Michigan Millers building, the Herman House, the Rogers Carrier House, the old Carnegie Library, and looking at what brings these buildings about. Why are they built in the styles they are? What does it tell us about life about that time? We're also going to be adding in a tour this year down in Rio Town for the first time that is going to look at both current and no longer standing buildings. For example, why is it called Rio Town? Well, unless you grew up here, you may not know that. It took me an embarrassing amount of time after moving to Lansing to figure that out. And then we're going to be doing the 2 weeknight tours. I'm really excited about these scripts. I think they're going to be really fun. One is alleyways, where we're going to be walking behind the buildings and looking at sort of, what that can tell you and how alleyways were used. The other is downtown disasters that looks at the floods and the fires and the ice flow problems, where back in 1875, there was such a huge dam of ice breaking up on the river. It actually took out a whole succession of bridges. So it was virtually impossible to get across the river downtown for several weeks afterwards. This made national news all the way to California.
Lansing's basically an island.
Right, it is.
If you look at it on a map,
the
Grand River encircles Lansing.
Right.
So the bridges are not operating. It's pretty difficult to get around.
Yeah, this is really a water city. I mean, we don't think of it as often as we should. Although you said you were out this weekend and noticed how many people use the water.
There was a lot of people on the water, not just on the trails. They were in paddle boats and kayaks primarily, and a couple power boats.
That's good to see them. Yeah.
I haven't seen that in a long time.
That's nice.
It was fun.
Nice. Well, Friday night, everybody will have to congregate and for the grand opening of the Made in Lansing exhibit the pop-up exhibit held by the Historical Society of Greater Lansing. Thank you very much for joining us, Valerie.
Thank you.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. And we're going to change gears, and we have been focusing for two previous shows on the issue of Alzheimer's in the community. And we're going to be joined by Wendy Briggs, who is with the Holt Senior, and let me make sure I get this right, Senior Care and Rehab Facility.
That is
right?
correct, yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that facility and what kinds of things you do there?
Sure. Our facility is long-term care. We have a short-term rehabilitation center as well. We have 35 beds that are certified just for our rehab patients coming in with knees, hips, and just focusing on all areas.
So it could be physical rehab,
Residents coming with after strokes, also receiving like our speech therapy, which also really works on that cognitive component as well.
And so you do have a significant clientele then that's also associated with Alzheimer's.
Yes, we do.
Have you seen a rise in those numbers?
Yes.
Over the years?
Yes. I've been at the facility about 15 years. Back in, my early career there, I would say that we were probably 50 to 60% of individuals with a form of dementia. It's closer to 75 to 80% now.
Wow,
I know this is probably not the best way to put this, but is America and in general, but also Lansing ready to meet the demand? I mean, it's just growing astronomically.
as the population ages. I mean, we
Yeah.
look at the graying of America, and I mean, I'm at the leading edge of the baby boomers. My dad was, it is Memorial Day.
Mm-hmm.
My dad worked very hard to try to escape the draft, only to find out that he was 4F anyhow. I always say I wouldn't be here. He wouldn't have married my mother if it hadn't been an exemption, right? I mean, they rushed the marriage so that he wouldn't have to go into the service. And the reality is that that puts me at the head of all those baby boomers who came from the returning troops.
Sure.
And we're going through this culture literally like the watermelon in the belly of the snake. And we're going to be hitting in huge numbers starting now. And
Yes.
it's a huge challenge. I mean, do we have the resources to be able to take care of people?
It is a huge challenge. I mean, within our facilities, we have a 103 bed facility, and we have residents anywhere from 45 to 100. So just trying to meet their psycho and social needs is such a vast difference.
Yeah.
I think
This is a really heavy lifting too, isn't it, taking care of dementia and Alzheimer patients?
it is. It's very physically draining as well as emotionally draining.
Is it difficult too? Because it would seem to me that you can't leave them alone for very long. I'm noticing more and more alerts on my Nixle system. For those of you who haven't done it, you might want to sign up for nixle.com. It's a free service. The Ingham County Sheriff urges you to do so because they tell you about various problems. And we see more and more of so and so has wandered away from home, and
Yes.
they have problems,
Yes.
and be on the lookout for them. So it does seem we're seeing more and more. They require a high degree of supervision, don't they?
Yes, I mean they're very quick, and they become so frightened that they get turned around.
There's a condition called sundowning, isn't there, where there tends to be people get worse as the sun goes down?
Yeah,
Or is that myth?
it's not myth. I mean, it's definitely a time of day that we really start seeing residents become very restless, agitated, and a little bit more confused. However, there's some study out there that really feel that it's because they're tired.
So it's fatigue
You know,
related.
yep, they're up all day. So
Mm.
there's some research out there, trying to figure out even if they can rest, a 20-minute to 40-minute rest period in the morning and another one in the afternoon, that really does lessen the sundowning type behaviors.
One of the things that, since there's someone in our family that has Alzheimer's, that was interesting to me is when I first asked to read a book, because that's what I do, I read a book, and they said one of the books they suggested was 36 hours. And I've heard that commonly. Are there other books that you'd recommend?
There is. I mean, 36 hours is a wealth of information. However, I don't feel that it really touches on how, as a caregiver, we go about caring for these individuals. It really talks, to me more on a medical standpoint, explaining the disease itself. The two that I really find that I really recommend to my caregivers are Alzheimer's Essentials, and it's a practical skills for caregivers. It's by Britton Gordeau. and the other one is talking to Alzheimer's. And it's the simple ways to connect when you visit with your family member.
Mm.
And that's one of the hardest things, I think, for paid caregivers as well as family caregivers, is to go into the situation, and every day may be different, but to try and visit with your loved one that you've known all of your life, however they no longer know you.
Yeah.
So having skills and knowledge of how can I make this visit still memorable and enjoyable for both parties.
That's wonderful.
Hmm.
I know the last time I saw my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, and spent an hour with her and had a wonderful time with her, as I was leaving, she said, "Thank you for coming, Laverne." And I realized my cousin was getting credit for this trip. And she, all the while, she thought I was my cousin Laverne. And so, but it was still a wonderful interchange. And she was, you never know. I mean,
And that's one of the things, you have to go with the flow.
Yes.
You do,
I
don't
mean,
you?
you just really have to be adaptable.
It's hard for
Very.
people who are used to control, I would think. It's got to be really rough on
Yes.
them to be, they like things just so,
Mhm.
because it doesn't work that way. You can have good days and bad days. It's not always
Right.
predictable.
Exactly. And you
Uh,
cannot, you can't reorient them to our day, to where we are today.
I watched a special on what they're experimenting with in some of the Netherlands, and they're working with Alzheimer's patients, and they're actually creating little communities.
Yes, I
Did you-
love it.
Isn't that
It
wonderful?
is wonderful.
I think, I mean, I'd love to see, could we have some intentional communities here where people could pool resources potentially and have something like that?
I think so. I mean, I want to push just for our one hall that we have, that
Yeah.
mainly our residents with Alzheimer's or dementia live, and it makes their life, it makes sense to them.
Yes.
It's that sense of community and reassurance, because every time they wake up, they don't remember where they're at. And if you can create this community to where they know which room is going to house their meals, and it just creates
Are there ways to
serenity.
give additional stimulation to, I mean, do things like having a pet, having a dog to pet and a cat to pet, does that help?
Pet therapy is huge, and like I've been fortunate enough that we have 2 pet therapy dogs that
Oh, do you?
go to work with me every day,
Oh,
and it's amazing.
How were they trained?
Just actually,
They just there.
Isabel took the Good Citizenship class. They have to take that, and then there's a couple different certificated trainers in town. One at the Capital Area Humane Society that will certify them. They just kind of make sure that they're comfortable with wheelchairs wheeling by them, that they're
yeah.
not just snapping up food, that they're friends with all the other animals.
That could be a problem, yeah,
Mhm.
sure, wonderful.
So it's really an easy process.
Are there places where a person can bring their pet?
Yes, I mean, here at Holt Senior Care and Rehab Center, we're very pet friendly.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes.
That matters so much. I mean, literally, they're members of the family, and I would think that
Mhm.
that's one connection that people would keep quite a long time.
Exactly. So, I mean, we have, our visiting ones that come in on a regular basis, but we encourage families to bring their loved ones in for visits. We have 2 beautiful courtyards that they can visit with, as well outside with the dog, and their faces just light up.
My mother spent some time at the Ingham County Medical Facility
Mhm.
on Dobie Road, and what I liked about that place was that it had one of those certifications for environmental issues. I mean, it had plants all over and birds
Yes.
and bird
The
cages, and
Eden.
it gives you that feeling of being connected back to nature.
Yes.
There's some things I think we're really beginning to be a bit smarter about making these less sterile and
Yes.
forbidding facilities. I mean, people have such a resistance. It's so hard to give up independence to begin with, let alone to
Very
go into a
much.
facility that you feel is not welcoming.
Mhm.
One of the things that I learned and have noticed is people lose their memory in reverse. Is that the best way to say it?
Yeah.
It is.
And so the Historical Society, we've been talking about possibly doing some programs that
Oh,
help
that'd be
people relate to history,
wonderful.
the old things.
that
or
is so exciting.
I mean, that's
You could do
just,
a little touring thing?
yep,
I
makes
Oh,
sense
that
I
because
was
they do
thinking
connect.
that
They
as
do.
she was talking, as
Yeah.
Valerie
We
was
might
talking.
do it for this exhibit, is to try to pull
Wow.
something together.
A
because
small
I
touring
love
show?
that.
Yep,
That
it
would
just
be
seems to make sense
It
because
does.
people do remember things that happened a long time ago.
Mhm.
Right. It would be nice to be able to reminisce about those, the era of your childhood. I
Mhm.
mean, I'm now old enough that, I mean, I'm one of those people that talks about how I remember them coming with ice and the tongs for the ice box, and the guy with the scissors grinder, and the knife grinder who came and he would pick up your rags and get your rags from you, that kind of thing. I mean, that's going way back there. And if you do it in reverse, you got to go quite a ways back to get to those nowadays. Yeah.
So we are talking about doing that. I think we're going to try because there
Oh.
seems to be an audience that would find value in this.
Oh, definitely.
Music works well too.
Music
right?
is wonderful. Music,
Especially music from
yes.
their era.
Yes. Right now we're on an iPod drive, so we can
Are you?
have as many iPods as possible.
Not too much Iron Maiden, I suppose.
No, probably not. But we do,
That'll come.
That's what I'm wondering about.
we do have one younger man that I would be putting Journey on for him.
Yeah, the member of our family listens to our iPod all the time because I don't have it anymore. I know that in our
You've
Bose
given it up.
speakers.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really just
It just-
changes his outlook immediately.
It does. It really, music hits our emotional memories.
Yes.
And those are the ones that are sealed in there, is our emotional
What other
memories.
What other things help in therapy like that? Not necessarily therapy, but
Exercise. I mean, physical activity really does help, especially when we're talking about sundowning as well. Getting them up to walk is just so important. And I always, when I'm training my new caregivers, is what is the first thing that we learn to do? Usually, what do we strive so hard for?
Yeah.
It's walking. And so walking just can really lessen. And sometimes when they're walking, residents without, more than a couple words, sentences would come out with complete sentences as you're walking.
Interesting. Interesting. I think that would be really critical. I was thinking about that today, the role of music, that when music plays in our lives. My husband's a musician, and I thought people sometimes don't think of that as being, it's not as valid somehow as creating a product or something. But in reality, music is so much a part of the fabric of our lives. Getting up and getting out and doing things. We dance with people. I mean, it's so important.
I wish I had a better recollection of the title of the book, but about 4 years ago, a Michigan notable book was about the woman was a CBS radio correspondent. Her father got Alzheimer's. She moved back to Michigan, and her and her father were in bands together, so she reconnected with him when he was alive through music. It's a really remarkable book. I'll have the title next week. And that's kind of the first that I ever thought about music therapy. At about the same time, MSU was eliminating the musical therapy program.
That was one of the saddest things I've ever seen.
I'm at a loss for that.
Well, a good friend, my friend Norm Pollock and his wife Nancy. Nancy was a product of that program.
Right.
And she did remarkable work with a facility in Cleveland, Ohio. She was the director of that facility for a while. And I mean, music it's just incredible the difference that it makes. It just really brings people back, makes their lives enjoyable again. They're not sitting there moping or watching just like zombies in front of a TV.
Exactly.
They're interacting.
They're living in the moment, which is all that they can do, is live in that moment. But
There are people will acquire when they're in a facility what's called institutional behavior. I mean, how do you make it so that they don't, just hide in bed? I mean, because I know fear is a large part of this.
Fear, it does. They become very fearful, but I think it's all about making those relationships. And I stress that with our staff, and we have a new training that we do, person-centered thinking, that our care is based on what their needs are. And it's, every person has a different need. And taking the time, I remember going through my CNA classes years and years ago that, we weren't allowed to sit on the bed. I mean, it was, you're their caregiver and that was it. Well, that's not what we need. These are our friends. These are our family.
Right.
And really developing those relationships just really help. They know who they can go to. They may not know your name, but they know that you're someone safe. You're someone who's going to get something that they need.
That's such a wonderful shift in attitude, because we used to see that patients were forced to adjust to the requirements of the institution. And now we're seeing institutions changing to meet the needs of the patient.
Yes.
And that's a totally different mindset. That's a real revolution. I have Nurse Ratched comes to mind.
Yes.
From One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yes,
It makes it chills all of our blood when we think about ever ending up in that circumstance.
Yes, I mean, that's one thing I'm very passionate about is just education and awareness of Alzheimer's. Because
that means picking the right people for your facility as well. Not everybody's
Staff?
suited to that work. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
that has got to be a real challenge.
It's high need. I mean, it's really difficult. That might be
Mhm.
some of the most difficult work, other than maybe dealing with children in cancer or something. It's really.
Mhm.
How do you deal with the issue of burnout in staff? How do you make sure that they don't burn out?
I think a lot of it is management support. Over the years, you see when the management may be weaker, you'll see more burnout in the staff. And just making it fun. Like we just finished up National Nursing Home Week. Um, and we try and do that throughout the year anyway, but it is our one big week of the year that we just celebrate the whole day and the whole week.
Oh,
So it's fun. The staff feel more connected to the residents and
we've got to start getting maybe some local musicians to go in and spend some time too. Bring a guitar, play.
That's a
have
really good idea.
Yeah, I was just thinking I'm going to start donating some of my husband's time to go down there.
oh
and
my
help.
gosh,
Yeah,
that would be
yeah,
wonderful.
that'd be wonderful. Yeah.
Because live music, we can do our music therapy, we can do our sing-alongs, but it's that live music that really just it stays with them for
Oh, yeah.
days.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with Wendy Briggs of the Holt Senior Care and Rehab Facility out on Willoughby Road, out there in Holt, and talking a little bit about the care of people who are dealing with the issue of Alzheimer's. We've learned the warning signals in our first show, and then we've talked about some of the other issues about caregiving. One of the favorite tips we heard the last time was over and over again using the same basket of laundry to engage the person and
Sure.
say, help us fold this. And the good news about the short attention memory span is that they will do it 4 or 5 times a day.
The first time
So-
I saw that done was, I went,
Isn't that great?
what? But then I got it.
Right?
Yeah.
It provides them a purpose.
Yes.
Something that they know how to do. It's so important to have a strength-based approach when you're dealing.
And feel useful.
Yes.
Yeah, we all want to
Yes.
feel useful and needed.
And that's one of the other books that I really recommend to families is Learning to Speak Alzheimer's, because it really does focus on the strengths that the individual remains, throughout the journey, because it does change. And if we as the caregivers and in the setting that we're in can adapt so where they're just feeling successful, there's certainly less frustration and more just enjoyment in their day.
Now, you cannot be rigid. You made a good point, Bonnie. This is not
Mm.
a disease you can be rigid with in treatment.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
have to be adaptable second by second, especially if you're
Yes.
a caregiver who's 24 hours.
It's so hard too because I have watched, for example, with my father-in-law who suffered from the disease, and he had been an academic at MSU. And his project when he was older was he established his own publishing company, and he loved doing the research. And he was doing some research on a family member's kind of suitable for Veterans Day. It was a family member who had been lost in one of our wars. I'm not sure I even remember which one. And I remember his ultimate frustration when he realized that he was no longer able to complete that project. And that's very hard for people to give up.
Very.
And especially people, I think we're going to need a wide variety of approaches and facilities for people, because people have very different backgrounds, very different needs, very different kinds of ways that they want to contribute.
Exactly. And different coping skills as well.
Is that right?
Makes a difference too. Some individuals that maybe have more coping skills, a little more flexible in their personality to begin with, cope with some of those adaptions, like if they are a poet, being able to allow someone else to possibly, be writing for them. Where other individuals that are very rigid, they're not always willing to take that help.
One thing that's very hard for people to give up is driving.
Oh, yes.
I watched my husband's grandmother. I spent a frantic half hour in the back seat of what they called the chocolate car. It was both a brown car, and she used it to go get chocolate.
Oh, right.
She still did.
She knew
And
what she wanted.
she didn't even have a license anymore. She certainly wasn't insured, and I didn't find that out till I was in the back seat. Fortunately, about a week later, they said, we're not going to do this anymore, and they took the rotor out of the car. But that's hard to do. Very hard to persuade somebody to give that up.
And it's typical that they get lost driving.
Yes.
Oh.
It's very typical. In fact, that's one of the warning signs that we saw early on was going to someplace you always go, but not knowing how to get there.
Wow.
Yeah, I hear it a lot in my support groups where, the caregiver will say, well, I let them still drive to, to Daryl's. There's the store that they went to for years, or, just down to the school. But we never know when that time is going to be that that route they're not going to remember,
Yeah.
and then they get the call that, they found them in Ohio or
Very difficult.
Wendy, I know one of the things that the Alzheimer's groups are doing is fundraisers now.
yes.
That's become sort of the thing you have to do, pay for research and other things.
Mhm.
There's a couple local things coming up.
We do. Holt Senior Care and Rehab for the last 4 years have been working on a fundraiser called Ales for Alzheimer's. We kind of promoted it just in the beginning for just taste testing beer, but now we've kind of included wine this year and hopefully some chocolate. But it's a great event. It's actually Friday, June 27th from 4 to 9 at the Charlar Place in Holt.
Charlar?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not familiar with, where's that located?
It's just south of Edrew's roller rink off of
Oh,
Cedar
okay.
Street.
All right.
Yeah, between Holt and Mason. We've been having it in the past at Buddy's in Holt, but we just kind of outgrew the space.
Really?
Yes,
Wow.
so each year it keeps getting bigger. Everybody gets their own little mug that they can take home, and it's just a great time of sharing and networking. And we have a silent auction. People are actually Margaret Ross, a jeweler in Mason, is going to donate a personalized bracelet.
Wow.
So that'll be one of our
Mm.
auction off items, and they can, personalize the design based on the individuals'
Wonderful.
interest.
Wow.
Yes, so it's a great time this year. I think we're going to add soft serve ice cream with a little purple tinge to it, since purple is the Alzheimer's Association
the
color. Mm-hmm.
Ribbons? Do they wear purple ribbons?
We wear purple bands.
Oh, purple bands.
Mhm.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
I wonder, because it seems everybody has a ribbon these days, so.
Or a band.
Or a band.
Mhm.
Aha.
Right.
Well, it's wonderful.
We've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners have too over the period of 3 weeks.
I'd like to thank Wendy Briggs for coming in and telling us, and we're going to be, I think, repeating this every year and looking at some of the issues. I guess now I did want to say that one of the previous groups that we had talked about was autism and being on the autism spectrum. And one of the things I was very concerned about was that the Washington Post published an article this afternoon about a supposed research connection between autism spectrum and both spree killers, mass killers, and serial killers, suggesting that there's a connection between that, a statistically significant connection between that, and also brain injury. And the reason I was so upset about it is based on the evidence from this past weekend, again, where there was a young man who apparently was somewhere on the spectrum who committed that horrible crime out in Isla Vista, California. I'm afraid that people are making a leap, including those researchers. I went and read the research, and quite honestly, I don't mean to be unkind. I may not be the best researcher in the world, but I thought it was pretty shoddy research. It conflated serial killers and mass killers, and they're very different groups.
Mm-hmm.
It conflated both brain injury and autism. By the time you got done, you didn't know anything. One of my bottom line questions to any research is, what do you know when you know it? And I read the whole research study that they published. It was a peer-reviewed study. And I thought, now I don't know any more than I did when I started. We don't know the background of many of these people. We don't know if they would or would not have been diagnosed with various things. We don't know if they had a brain injury as a child. Someone like a Jeffrey Dahmer or a Ted Bundy is not the same dynamic as a Ted Kaczynski or an Andrew Cunanan. I mean, very different types of crimes. It was as if you would say, well, we're going to take check forgers and people who rob banks. And we're going to put them together in the same
Money
study.
is the
Right, yeah, they get money from people. So and then people who run, maybe Bank of America or one of those. I mean, it was a strange study, and I'm very unhappy to see that, because I think it's a tough enough situation for people with the stigma of mental illness in the culture without something like this happening. It was a very frustrating time. I was surprised to see the Washington Post run the headline, of course, that says, statistically significant connection between these
They're
things.
usually more careful than that. And I bet how long has that study been out?
It appears to be quite new. It was just released. And I just was surprised. There are many caveats in the study saying the sample, of course, is too small, et cetera, but that's maybe why they lumped everybody in together. But I just thought it was a very bad move. I did want to say that both Bill and I discovered when I came in tonight, have read the manifesto from Elliot Rodger. That was not pleasant reading.
No,
I read that
wasn't.
yesterday morning. What did you come away with, Bill?
I was depressed.
Very concerning.
Yeah, and it's an example. I think it's another example of the individuals who are doing this kind of thing and how they arrived there. And I think again, like the study you were talking about, I don't think we know exactly how they arrived there
No,
because many people go through the same things and become just everyday people.
Hmm.
I don't know what the triggers are.
we've picked up on the misogyny, and everybody understands that, and that ferocious sense of entitlement that that young man had, where he felt everybody should be deferring to him. There's a part in his manifesto where he more than once says his mother should marry a millionaire just because it would make his life easier. And what's wrong with his mother that she's not doing that for him? Also, in the close of the manifesto, which I haven't heard anybody talk about, he planned to kill his younger brother, his
Right.
younger half brother.
Right, he was going to kill family.
He was, and why was that? He was very close to that young man. There was one person he'd had a successful relationship with, but he didn't want to leave him behind where he would be the successful one and he would be the failure. And it was such a bizarre narcissism that I was so struck by that. I think if there's a common thread, it is that sort of self-reverence that was very, very dangerous in his case.
So how do you get there though?
How do you get there? Boy, isn't that the
I
question?
mean,
I think I look for answers as much in Shakespeare as I do in sociology sometimes. I mean, I do think there are, that's why I'm so unhappy to see the autism label being put on this, because it's just like saying, well, he's somebody who has two arms. I'm not so sure how much it really means. So it was a very difficult time. It's not exactly light reading, and I don't know that I would recommend it for a holiday. Well, we will be back next Monday night with LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing with the Lansing Online Radio Show. I want to thank tonight's guests, and next week we hope to talk a little bit about what's coming up. Maybe we'll do a wrap up on Tourist in Your Own Hometown and find out what happened. Thank you for tuning in.